Daily solutions. Daily solutions. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Daily solutions. Daily solution. Whoa. Crash.
Okay.
Hey, everybody.
Graham,
Ashkahn.
question. What's the most difficult float you've ever had, whether emotionally, physically, or other? Which I guess, like, spiritually,
Okay.
socially, like you're like a weird community float, you know?
All right. You want to go first?
Yeah, no, I'll just wing most difficult float ever. Let's talk about a difficult float.
I know my most difficult float.
Oh, well, then you go first. Like, go for it. Yeah.
Mine was actually, I was just really hungover. I mean, that's the crux of the story. I was super hungover, but I had a float booked the next morning, and I was like, yeah, I'll go in for this float. And it was really hot. Like, just the temperature was, I think, too warm, and I was hungover, and it just made me real uncomfortable. Like, I started to feel nauseous, and I was like sweating, and I've never like not wanted to be in a float tank so much as that, and I still like stuck it through. I was like, no, you gotta float. Like, I don't know why I didn't just get out, but I did. I floated the entire time, and it was like miserable for like the entirety of it because I just felt horrible. So that wasn't fun. That was my worst float.
Yeah, I'm trying. Like, I've had floats where there's like parts of them are really the most uncomfortable time that I've spent in a float tank, but there were other parts of the floats that were okay, you know. So it's interesting. Like, I don't think I've had a float that's just been awful the entire way through. So like one example is, and this is like the beginning of the float being bad, was I just like exercised that morning and done some stretching, and then I went on a jog, and I literally jogged up to the door of Float On after going for, you know, like a couple miles, and like went in and I, you know, showered off and got all ready and hopped in the float tank. And normally I like the float tank a little cooler. So like the staff, I have a note on my account. The staff turns down the temperature on the float tank for me when I go in, which they'd done that day. But I was already so hot from exercising. And going in there, I left the door to the float tank fully open just to try and get some cool air coming in there. And even with that, I was just like overheating, and I actually had to like get out and take a cold shower and sit on the bench for, I don't know, like 10 minutes or something just to cool down my system so it was comfortable enough for me to get back in the float. But yeah, like hopping directly into a tank right after heavy exercise for me was one of the most unpleasant experiences where I just couldn't stay inside a tank. And I got another one too. So the other half of the float, as long as that was like a bad intro, but then afterwards, it was actually really nice being in the float tank. Like, I think if I exercised and then waited a half an hour, I'd still have kind of a nice experience. So on the flip side, when I was trying to do my 24-hour float, I only ended up making it for 12 hours, and the reason is like for the last hour, when I'd been in there, my scalp just started like tingling. And then the tingling kind of turned to like a slight itching, and the itching turned to like a burning. And it turns out when you've been in the float tank by yourself for 11 hours, and then your scalp starts burning, it's really hard to think of anything except that you're like, there's too much hydrogen peroxide in there, and you're just burning off your hair, and you're gonna like permanently damage your scalp, and like your thoughts are all kind of weird and floaty. And eventually I was just like, okay, I gotta get out of here. And I like checked the mirror to make sure I hadn't dissolved all of the hair on my body, which I hadn't. But yeah, that's what ended up cutting my 24-hour float down to a 12-hour float, was just things started getting so
head
like
was melting half.
Yeah. Like it was
totally normal into a float, I think.
So I think those were the two most uncomfortable experiences I personally had in a float tank. And both of them where I actually just had to get out because it was so unpleasant.
Yeah, I mean, I drank a bunch of coffee before going in once. That wasn't very...
Oh, yeah, fast floats.
Yeah, I was not really enjoying. I was like all over the place, and I was having a lot of trouble relaxing or anything like that. So, and I stuck in for that entire one too. I don't know why I should just get out at a certain point if it feels like it's not happening.
So, but I actually like this question because it's a reminder that, you can have customers coming in and they can have bad floats like this.
Yeah.
I mean, these weren't our first floats or anything like that. So even after hundreds of floats, you can still have a bad float. So on your first time, I think it's even more likely that something like this goes wrong, or you didn't prepare properly, or, for me, it's like I end up getting hot in the float tank, so I need the temperature turned down. Other people might not feel that, so it might just be even your first float. You don't even know how your body interacts with the float tank.
And you don't know when you're not like experienced like us and you know how the whole thing works. Like if it's your first time, you don't know what it's supposed to be like. You don't know if you're feeling too hot, that it can be cooler, and like that would be a more pleasant experience for you. You're just like, this is what floating is.
Yeah, or if you forgot to not drink caffeine and, no one like at the front desk says, did you drink caffeine specifically
like
coming in? So you might not even
beforehand.
like associate a bad float or one where you
Right.
can't relax with that cup of coffee you had 3 hours ago or something. So, I mean, what do you, like, how do we take this into the real world then, kind of knowing that? Ashkahn?
Well, I mean, obviously this is why we warn people about things before they come in, right? We warn them to not
Yeah.
drink coffee. We warn them to not shave or wax so it doesn't feel like their head is
Not get a
melting
full
off.
face tattoo.
Yeah. Like that's to prevent things like that from happening. And temperature is just frustrating. It's one of those things that is the most common complaints you get, or things are a little bit warmer or a little bit cold. And so, letting people know beforehand, I mean, you could let people know going into the float tank that if they feel a little warm or cold, to like let you know, and you can adjust the temperature, or to reminding people afterwards is what we do a lot. Like after their first float, if they say something like that, we're like, oh, we can adjust the temperature for you.
Yeah, it's a weird
But-
one. Like because people, like a good amount do get hot or cold, but also a lot of stuff is in our heads, just as human beings.
Or just we're
like
running different temperatures or whatever.
Like
you know?
I just worry, like we don't really check in with people beforehand about being able to correct temperature afterwards, nor do we check in about a lot of things other than avoiding caffeine and stuff like that, just because like priming people feels kind of weird. Like you're almost priming them to pay more attention to the temperature. If you're like, hey, some people feel a little like hot or a little cold, let us know. I feel like they're actually paying more attention and might be more likely to just feel something's off, even if it otherwise would be comfortable.
Right.
So I don't know. Again, that's not like it's the right decision. It's one of those where we're like, I don't know what to do here. So we decided on that.
I mean, I think a lot of what we do is just making sure people know every float can be different.
Yeah.
And that like you
Yeah,
come
yeah.
in and it's hard to tell exactly what's going to happen in there, what it's going to feel like, or where you're going to be, or physically or emotionally, or any of that stuff. And that's just kind of part of the float experience. And I think for the most part, people get that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's a great reminder to just really make sure you have great systems for checking in with people afterwards
Yeah.
in place as
That's
well.
where we get most of our complaints about temperature. Like sometimes people don't even tell us, but it's because we have some sort of post-float check-in system where they actually be like, well, actually everything was great, but I was really cold during like the second half of it. And like that's, then we can be like, oh, well, we can turn the temperature up for you next time you come in. And they're like, oh, great.
Yeah. Yeah. And we kind of double down too. We try to catch people when they come out of their floats in the shop. We actually have our staff members do like email behinds or call behinds to people who have already come in to ask them how their experience went. There's an auto email that gets sent out 90 days later. We like avidly check all of our online review sites to see what people are saying and hopefully get in touch with them. So, a multi-prong approach too, just like anything that we can do up to 3 months out or even longer to actually get that feedback someone might not have given any time sooner is sometimes the only way you'll find out about weird experiences that people have.
Mm-hmm.
And they're likely, again, like, you've probably, if you're listening to this, you've probably had weird floats. And it's probably really fortunate that wasn't like your first, second, and third float were all weird, because you might not be listening to this podcast and so excited to start a float center if that had been the case. Compassion, I guess, is what I'm getting at. This is a good lesson in compassion.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
I don't see where you're coming from at all.
What about emotionally? I don't think I've ever had an emotionally like difficult float. I mean, like negative, I should say. Like I've had floats where like, I have these kind of moments of thinking through things that I don't think I would have thought of outside the float tank, and they're like important thoughts to me, or like difficult things to come to terms with. But I've never had one that I felt was like a negative experience.
Yeah, me neither. Like I've definitely had floats where I'm just like crying inside the float tank and like dealing with some serious stuff, and
Salt getting in your eyes. Been there.
emotionally, not physically is what we're talking
I
about
see,
now.
I see.
Salt, metaphorical salt getting in my
Coming out of
metaphorical
your
eyes. Yeah. Coming out of my eyes. Yeah, no, it's other direction. Yeah. Right, but like even that's not like a negative experience necessarily. Nor did that make me get out of the tank or anything like that. So
We did have someone. Remember that person who was telling us about their dark floats?
Yeah.
Do you remember that? Someone who like had floated, had a great experience, like to the point where like her friends and family were like, "What's going on? Like, what are you doing? Like, you seem like a different person." And like the floating was what she was attributing to like totally just changing the way she was approaching her life. And like she, after like a handful of floats, had one that she just said she came out of and was like, had a weird experience inside, went to like some weird places in her head, and came out of the float in like a really weird place, and it just like carried with her. She called it her dark float. And then her friends and family again, like afterwards, were like, "What's going on today? Like, what's wrong with you?" So I don't know. I guess that there are some dark floats out there.
Yeah, I mean they can. I mean, yeah, the float tank is just a body of salt water. So like in the human brain is
And it's
vast
dark.
and complex and
Yeah.
can get pretty dark. So yeah, the experience in the tank, of course, is only as vast as the human being having them.
I think most people have the response that we have, though, which is that like if you're going to those places or thinking those things, it's because like you need to, or it's something you need to work through, and you ultimately find that to be a useful or productive experience.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I can think of people who haven't been able to stay in the tank for, just today we had someone stopped by to float on their way to their wedding.
Right.
and we gave them a free float, but they couldn't stay in the float tank for the entire time.
Just super amped.
Yeah, our manager said they were just too worked up, which is completely understandable. But I describe that as like an emotional enough float that you can't stay in, right? You're just like too excited for the fact you're getting married that day. Yeah. All right, so there you go. Got a little bonus answer there too. Like, what's the takeaways from you having challenging floats?
All right. Well, if you guys have other questions, you can go over to floatanksolutions.com/podcast.
Nailed it.
And type them in. We'll answer them.
Yep, just as thoroughly and comprehensively as we did today.
All right. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
Bye, everyone.